Hello, I'm Simon Whistler. You're watching the Today I Found Out YouTube channel, and in the video today we're looking at whether you can change your legal name to just have a first or last name if you wanted to. Mononymous people, or people with a singular given name, were once the norm throughout much of the world, but are rare in modern times, particularly in the West. As such, most of our infrastructure is built to accommodate people with two names. Invariably, this is a first name and a surname, with the occasionally embarrassing, antiquated middle name in homage to some ancestor or other for good measure. Given this, what difficulties do people with only a singular given name face in a society so built to favor the duonymous and trionymous? Which Google tells me aren't actually words, but I now decree them as such. And is there anything stopping people with multiple names having a name change operation to become mononymous? To begin with, the idea of surnames, while popular today, is not universally held on Earth, and there are still cultures where children are simply given a singular name at birth. An example of this is the Indonesian and Javanese culture, where the mononymous are common. The most well-known example of this is likely Indonesia's first ever president, Sukarno. Despite having only a singular given name, Western journalists in the 1960s sometimes felt it necessary to make up some random second name when writing about President Sukarno to save having to take the time to explain that mononymous people are common in Indonesian culture. As you can imagine, in cultures where a singular name isn't unheard of, the government has no problem issuing IDs to mononymous individuals, and there exist examples of Indonesian passports with only one name listed. Their systems also easily accounts for the polynymous among us. For instance, in their passports, rather than having separate boxes for a last name and any given other names, they only have a singular box in which a person's name, however many distinct entities it might include, is written. In places like America or the UK, such forms are not always so accommodating. This is particularly an issue that impacts foreign students wishing to study in the West, especially when they're asked to fill in digital forms that don't allow you to proceed without filling in all the boxes. So what do mononymous people do in this case? Since not all digital forms are created equally, there's not really a singular, all-encompassing answer we can give about what happens in these situations. However, the general methods employed here seem to be the tedious route. People are required to either call the institution personally to explain and have an administrator bypass the restrictions manually, or alternatively, for some forms, a standard character set like NFN can be put in, understood to stand for no first name. That said, this seems to be more of an issue for those in the US more than the UK, as many places, like British universities, allow foreign students hailing from cultures where singular names are common to simply write their full given name in one of the available boxes and leave the others blank without the back-end coding complaining to the user about it. Given such difficulties for the mononymous, most people would avoid wanting to switch from a perfectly form-acceptable duonymous name to a mononymous. But if you wanted to, could you legally trim the fat of your name and go it solo? As it turns out, in many cases, yes, though with some stipulations. For instance, in the UK, where the rules are a little less nebulous than, say, the United States, the official website of the Deed Poll Office explains to readers that you are free to change any part of your name. You can change your first name, your middle names, and your surname. You can add or remove names, and you can change the spelling of names. The website goes on to acknowledge that while a British citizen can change their name to virtually anything they like, whenever they want, for any reason, by simply filling in a form and paying a small fee, they strongly advise people not to change their name for frivolous reasons. Then again, they note in the same paragraph that there's not really anything they can do if you should choose to do this. As for what an individual can choose to call themselves, there are only a handful of official rules in place, and they're basically the same rules enforced when you choose to name a baby. Basically, as long as you don't choose a name that is intentionally offensive or promotes hatred or illegal behavior or the like, you can change it to whatever you want. On top of this, the website notes that for technical reasons, names can't be over 300 characters long, contain numbers or symbols, or feature diacritical marks, umlauts, accents, etc. This isn't to say that they can't contain these things if you want to write them that way, it's just that they won't appear that way on any official documents like passports. As for choosing to go by a singular name, again, the Deed Poll Office acknowledges that it can do nothing to stop a person choosing to go mononymous, stating, "There is no law preventing you from being known by a single name name or mononym, that is, a surname only with no forenames, and HM Passport Office should accept such a name, although they may be more skeptical of your application. In such cases, individuals will be issued passports in which the field for forename will contain 3 large X's and an official observation explaining that's what's going on. Though the HM Passport Office is a different and distinct entity to the Deed Poll Office, British citizens wanting to change their name who hold British passports are required to convince both officers that their name change isn't frivolous, and as such, changing your name to a mononym is more difficult in these circumstances unless you hail from a culture where it is common, in which case the Passport Office should process your application without issue. The Deed Poll Office also advises citizens that while it's not illegal to go by a single name, it makes the process of identifying oneself substantially more difficult and asks people to consider the difficulties they will face in day-to-day life before making the decision to go to a mononym. Across the pond in America, changing your name is a more complicated affair, in part because each US state has its own rules about how one should go about this. That said, for the most part, the rules are similar to the ones in the UK, in that you can generally change your name to whatever you want within reason. Don't be offensive, don't try to change your name to something unintelligible, don't try to change your name to a trademarked phrase or celebrity's name, unless you can convince the powers that be that you have a legitimate reason for doing so, etc. The process of changing your name, however, is an altogether more litigious and complex affair, usually requiring you to appear in court and have the details of your name change published to be official. Exceptions to this latter rule include cases where an individual has been a victim of domestic violence. As for changing your name to a mononym, this is generally impossible in the US in all but the most exceptional of circumstances. As a result, only a handful of US citizens have passports listing a single name. Along with natives of culture where singular names are common, people known to be legally recognized by a single name include the singer Cher and the latter and silent half of the magician duo Penn and Teller. The reason changing your name to a mononym is so difficult in the US is because in most states, as mentioned, changing your name requires you to physically appear in front of a judge and justify the name change. Such a judge is unlikely to grant a request to allow a person to go by a mononym due to the inherent difficulties having such a name can cause. For people like Cher and Teller, who've been near universally known by their respective mononyms for decades, this isn't as much of an issue as those of us who can't just throw loads of money at any problems that subsequently pop up. The fact that they're both famous also probably helped their case with their respective judges. For those curious about what Cher and Teller's passports say in the box listing their first name, rather than a series of X's like in the UK, US passports instead put the aforementioned abbreviation NFN for no first name. Interestingly, 46 states allow a citizen to bypass part of this process and change their name by usage. This basically means if you go by a given name for long enough and can prove that fact, you can adopt that as your new name, though you'll still need a court order to make it official for a passport or the like. When this happens, similar difficulties to those mentioned above can arise. So all things considered, it's probably just easier to stick with the names we're given. Bonus fact: ever wonder why we call junk messages spam? Well, want to know more. While some have suggested this is because spam, as in the Hormel meat product, is sometimes satirized as fake meat, thus spam messages are fake messages, this potential origin, while plausible enough on the surface, is not correct based on surviving documented evidence of when the term started being used to mean junk or unsolicited messages. The real origin of the phrase comes from a 1970s Monty Python's Flying Circus skit. In this skit, all the restaurant's menu items devolve into spam. When the waitress repeats the word spam, a group of Vikings in the corner sing spam, 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 lovely spam, wonderful spam, drowning out all other conversation until they are finally told to shut it. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button below and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Also, over there on the right, a couple of other of our videos that you might enjoy if you enjoyed this one. And thank you for watching.